I'm going to talk you through this pre-bid meeting. I'll do some introductions in a minute. And what I'm going to do is talk you through an overview of the project as a whole and the main components, and then an overview of this particular contract scope and what's relevant for this proposal. I'll look at the request for proposal document, the particular requirements, a little bit of guidance on preparing the proposal, and then some Q&A at the end. So first point I just want to flag is in terms of anti-corruption policy, conflict of interest. I'll talk through in a minute, but a key part of this audit is to ensure the integrity of a procurement process. And one of our key areas of sensitivity is potential for corruption and particularly potential for conflict of interest. So there's information in your in your proposal document, and it's important that you look at that, check it out, and see the relevance. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. In terms of housekeeping now, so we've got a virtual meeting. It is compulsory for anyone putting in a proposal to have attended the briefing, and there's a requirement to give evidence of attendance. And obviously we've got a register of those logged in now. Again, the request for proposal document does have the documentation there for you to finalise in terms of demonstrating involvement in the briefing. One other housekeeping issue I'll just explain. We're on a Teams meeting. The presenters for the Teams meeting have access to microphone and even camera should we so wish. For the attendees, you have no access to microphone or camera, just in order to keep order in the meeting. And I'll go through how to raise Q&A, question and answer, in a minute. But just if you want to communicate, there's the normal Teams chat function, and we'll keep an eye on that and use that as a means to take questions from the attendees. So that's how we're constraining this. Okay, just to show you the main participants at the moment, I'm John Sawyer. I'm the Deputy Executive Manager of the Project Management Unit for Phase 2. I'm going to take you through this mainly because I've got the wider project overview. The discipline lead for this contract, who will be overseeing the whole procurement process and then the implementation of this contract, is Pekku Montveedi, and he's also on the call, and he'll be part of responding to any Q&A at the end. But further down the line, he would be the person that everyone's most directly involved in. Some idea of how we're structured as an organisation. So, as I'm sure most of you are aware, LHDA is the implementing agency within the Highlands project for the Lesotho component, which is by far the largest part of the Highlands project. Within LHDA, we have a fairly classic corporate hierarchy, although it's parastatal. So as chief executive, there's divisional managers for a number of divisions, and this just shows the key ones that are most relevant to us. Under the divisional manager for phase 2, there's the project management unit. There are branch managers for operations. Within the project management unit, there are then discipline leads looking after different consultants. And again, this is very much a stripped down organisation chart. But the point that will be relevant to you is there'll be a discipline lead over this contract, but there are also discipline leads overseeing tunnel, dam, major bridges contracts, and others covering many other. The project itself, okay, again, Lesotho, the fundamental aim is to deliver water from the highlands of Lesotho through to Gauteng, and in the process to use the opportunity to generate electricity for Lesotho. So South Africa gets the water, Lesotho gets the electricity. Under phase one, built mainly in the 1990s, Katsi Dam was built, and you have the Katsi Reservoir, and then a transfer tunnel through Mwela Powerhouse, the delivery tunnel into South Africa, feeding the water from that north towards Gauteng. Phase 1B involved Mahali Dam, the reservoir, and a transfer tunnel so that Mahali Dam tops up Katsi and then the water flows the same way. Phase 2 involves the new Podihadi Dam, which is just about to go out to tender in the general area of Mokhotlong, a reservoir which covers 50 square kilometers of land, and a transfer tunnel taking the water from Podihadi into Katsi so it can then feed through exactly the same system towards Gauteng. So this is our area of focus. It's in the Mokhotlong area. Just homing in there, in order to make that happen, there's the dam. Mokhotlong is over here. We flood a large area. This is the existing A1 access road to Mokhotlong. At this point, the existing road will be flooded and disappear under almost 100 meters of water. So we need a new bridge crossing that. That's a very major bridge, the Senqu Bridge. We'll talk about that. There's the dam itself, there's the transfer tunnel. In order to make this happen, we've got new access roads coming in, we've got new power line coming in, a whole lot of associated infrastructure, much of which is under construction at the moment. The key contracts that this audit is going to focus on are the transfer tunnel, which is 38 kilometers long, 5 meters diameter, between Podihadi Reservoir and Katsi. That is currently out to tender. The tender start date was 24th of May. Current closure date is 30th of August. So this is ongoing. The consultants, MSKC, is a consortium of regional consultants. Podihadi Dam, 165 meter high concrete face rockfill dam. So this is similar to Mahali Dam, but bigger, with a 50 meter high saddle dam. That's due to go out to tender this month, and following closely behind the transfer tunnel. There's another consultant involved in that. The members of these organizations, I think, are shown in your document. The major bridge, the Senqu Bridge, 822 meters long, cable-stayed concrete bridge. This will be one of the biggest bridges in Southern Africa. That is already out to tender close not too far away, and the consultant for that is Zatari. Each of these is a very major project, so to give you some sense of scale, the tunnel and the dam each will come in as a construction value of a good number of billions of rand. So these are very major contracts. So what's the scope of this contract that the proposal is related to? This is a probity audit. So it's a professional audit to check compliance to our procurement processes and procedures. So a little bit of context. We've got well over 30 contracts awarded so far, both consultancy and construction. As I mentioned, we're pretty careful about dealing with making sure that we have no corruption and addressing any potential conflict of interest. So far, we've had 2 cases that come to mind where there was a a perception of a potential conflict of interest, which actually had no impact whatever on the tender process and the tender evaluation and the validity of what was going on. But addressing it, because it came up at a late stage, actually in each case, caused a major disruption to the process, because we had to make sure that the process was kept without contamination, without accusations of contamination, and that disrupted each of those tenders quite significantly. On other occasions, even though the process was absolutely straightforward and there was no hint of anything going wrong, we still had legal challenges by those who didn't like the outcome. Now those have all been dealt with. I mean, some of those challenges were quite spurious, but we're aware that when we have multi-billion rand contracts, there's going to be acute sensitivity over the outcome. So we need to have a way of demonstrating that the process was followed properly. And if need be, if there is any issue that arises, of identifying it quickly, of dealing with it in order not to derail the entire process. So we want to find any genuine issues and deal with them. And then we need to be able to validate the process. And it is quite key, because disrupting these contracts has a major impact, and ultimately a major impact on when Gauteng gets its water. So we've got a series of focus areas. So we've got 3 contracts and 3 stages in each contract at which we want to look at an audit. So we end up with 9 focus areas which are spelt out. And there are 2 main deliverables. So there's the inception report, and then there are the 9 individual audit reports. So for each of the 3 contracts, there's a first audit, which is after issuing the tender documents, but just before the closure date, to ensure compliance with the tendering processes. The second audit is after completion of the evaluation report, as that evaluation report goes into client-employer review, to ensure that the tender evaluation process was followed properly. This is probably the most crucial one. And then the third audit is right at the end, once that the recommendations of the evaluation have been followed through and a contract has been negotiated and awarded, to review that process and ensure that that has happened in an appropriate fashion. And in each case, the audit is against the formal procedures that are laid down. Obviously, you're going to be interacting with a number of organisations. So for each of those main contracts, there's a discipline lead, who's the PMU LHDA representative. And then there's the consultant for each of those contracts. And that's typically it's a joint venture of engineering firms. So the bridge is a single engineering firm. There potentially will be consultation with other stakeholders, but any consultation with third parties will have to involve LHDA. Clearly, there's a major confidentiality issue here. We have to be very, very careful to keep the procurement process uncontaminated by interaction with third parties. Your reporting, inception report 2 weeks after contract award, each audit report 2 weeks after completion of each audit. And by completion of each audit, the audits themselves need to happen promptly, because this is a train that's already left the station, and stopping it would be extremely disruptive. In terms of the team, we've asked for lead auditor, individual members, collective team. We haven't spelled out in detail how you structure your team, because anyone putting a proposal in is going to have to build a team to address this, and you're probably going to have access to different resources in different ways. What we do want to be clear is this is an audit on a procurement process for major engineering work. This is not a routine financial audit where you send in standard accountancy trainee graduates to do their routine and try and work out what's going on. So we do want to see a credible team with credible experience. Our experience so far on auditing on the Highlands project, because we're very different, it's not always that successful in terms of the audits, focusing on what is really required for the project. So do make sure that you're responding to what is actually needed. And we've not set the bar particularly high. I mean, talking about audits on procurement contracts over 50 million rand, well, just appreciate that that's much less than 1% of the value of each of the two major contracts. So we require relevant experience, but we're not necessarily saying you've got to have seen a dam built or a tunnel built. We do require some professional registration, and we do have overall requirements there, but fundamentally this is about procurement and engineering contracts, and then having the auditing capability to go with that. Okay, the RFP, we work within a standard framework which is slightly adapted for each contract. So this contract is a somewhat simplified version of our standard request for proposal template. You've got a letter of invitation, you've got the instructions to bidders, the data sheet, terms of reference. There's the returnables, standard forms for technical and for financial, the anti-corruption policy, conflict of interest procedures in there, the evaluation criteria, how we're going to evaluate you is in there, conditions of contract, contract forms, and then a note on tax requirements. So this is very standard. This is very much what we issue for all of our contracts. Some particulars. So the meeting today, deadline for submissions, 12th of July, so you've got a few weeks. Tender validity, 120 days, study period, about 18 months. It's actually going to be a number of very brief, very intense interventions, and then some quite long gaps in between. That's just how this will work. 2 envelope system. Please make sure that if we ask for a financial proposal separate from your technical proposal, that the technical proposal does not include all the financial information, because you'll disqualify yourself. So if you're going to audit the procurement process, make sure that when you do your procurement process, you follow it carefully. Submission by CD-ROM or online, look at your data sheet for that. The bid is in Maloti, and you'll all be aware that Maloti is on a par with the Rand. The clarification process, there's the email address given for request for clarification. We will respond to any requests formally, and those will be issued to all potential bidders. Please, no communication with us except through formal channels. You will probably disqualify yourself if you pick up the phone and contact an LHDA official who happens to be a friend or a relative or a contact. And once the bids are submitted, there'll be no communication except for specific client requests for clarification. There are preference requirements, so the scoring is split between a technical evaluation, a financial evaluation, and preference. And preference carries a weighting that's given in the document, and that's associated with participation by Basotho, South African Black persons, women, youth, persons with disabilities. So look at the rules of the game there and see how you can respond to that. We've had good experience and not so good experience from this process on previous proposal rounds. So we produced some guidelines and some feedback, which are on the general information on our website. And I did discuss with our procurement team. We haven't actually changed those for several years because they're still relevant and the same issues keep coming up. So just have a look at that. But the simple point is respond to the request for proposals. And that doesn't mean send us your standard marketing brochures. It means if we ask for you to complete certain forms, complete those forms. If we ask for certain information, provide that information. If we say do this or do that, then do this or do that. And then we can actually evaluate your proposal properly. So use the forms, give us the information. And remember, we are not actually going to read your minds. We're going to read the document you submit. We're not going to rely on the fact that we know particular information. We're going to rely on the document you submit. So you have to make sure that what you submit actually addresses the issue and then follow the instructions to bidders. So data sheets provide the relevant project experience. So these are project information sheets, show key staff. So if you've done a particular audit and it's your lead auditor was leading that, say so, and we can see the connection. Show that you've actually fulfilled the right scope of services and provide client references. CVs, use the CV template. We've deliberately drafted that template to give us the information we want to see, because if we see a standard corporate CV, it often hides any inconvenient information. So use the CV. Don't just give us a list of projects. I mean, this is probably less true for auditors, but it's certainly true for engineers. We tend to get a list of all the projects a person's worked on without telling us what he actually did, whether he was the junior assistant or the chief. And we actually need to understand what the role and responsibility was. Academic requirements. We like to see the CV signed, please, by the individual or by someone signing an authorized person on their behalf. And that means that you're validating that it's true. We have had CVs which were manifestly rubbish, but they'd still been signed off. So I would rather we didn't see that, because it probably doesn't qualify you for the job. The evaluators do actually check some of the information on the CVs. We have been known to go online and check professional registrations and so on, and sometimes we find issues. I am aware of one individual who moved companies in a hurry after we identified the fact that he didn't have the registration he claimed, and the company had never checked. So be aware of that. The point about scores being marked down for low level of effort. If you put in a CV for lead auditor for your chief executive who has the most amazing experience, and then you put him in for 1 day's input, and we see several months of input for junior staff, we will know who's actually going to be expected to do the work. And that CV will not attract the magnificent points that it appears to earn, simply because we're going to discount it as being not really part of the proposal. So we will mark down CVs for people who are not genuinely participating. Bear in mind that one rejected CV can easily cost you the bid, because those points are key in building up your total. Price preference are relevant, they're important, but if you fail technically, you've failed. So we look at your technical capability, and then we look at the price if you pass the threshold. Staff input, provide the resource needed, use the timelines given. You're going to be accountable for delivering the service. So the bid price includes all parts of the terms of reference that are not explicitly priced. So don't come along afterwards and say, oh, well, these are all the extras. So that's the core. Question and answer. You're welcome to use the chat function now to ask questions, and we'll respond where we can verbally now, but any formal questions we will give a formal response to. What's probably easier is to use the procurement email address that's given there and formally ask questions through that. As I mentioned, we'll issue requests for clarification and the clarifications to everybody who's registered to be interested in the proposal. All written queries will be responded to formally, and only written statements will be taken as binding. So if you ask a question now and we answer in good faith, then our response is given in good faith, but it is not a contractually binding response because we're not going to spend a lot of time over this. Okay, I see a flagged hand. You can't actually speak. So if you go to the chat function, the meeting chat, the little bubble at the top of the screen there, at the moment, that just has a record of who has joined the chat. If you want to ask a question, type a message into the chat function and we will address that. I'm just flicking through. I see people joining and leaving, but I don't see any questions yet. So if anyone wants to ask questions, please type a message in there and we'll respond to that. You can't talk to me because that function is disabled. So okay, I'm not seeing any questions coming through. I'll give it another minute for you to scratch your heads and think. As I say, in some ways it's easier if you use the email address for any queries. But the bottom line is, please read the document, use the document, respond to the document. No. Okay. No questions at all. Well, in that case, I'm going to say thank you very much. Aha! The Switzer currently has auditors. Will they be allowed to participate in this bid? Yes, we're not excluding anyone. I think we need to look at what constitutes a conflict of interest. So the fact that you're already auditing LHDA, I mean, to be honest, I think it's almost inevitable that any auditing organization will have a link somewhere with some of the engineers or LHDA participating. So the point is simply to identify that in any proposal, and we will ensure that it's not going to compromise this procurement process or the actual audit process. But I don't see any reason that existing audit, I mean, there's a number of different audit functions linked to the project. I don't see that those will be automatically disqualified. Again, we'll pick that up and respond formally, but that's my immediate reaction. But I mean, having said that, I don't see that it necessarily gives them any advantage because they're not actually auditing this kind of process in this way. So yes, they may compete, but they'll be competing on the same terms as anyone else. Do we have any more questions? Well, at least from the Switzer's query, I know the function is available to you. If there are no more questions, I'm going to close the meeting, but thank you all for your attendance, and I do hope to see some very high quality proposals from you in response to this. Thank you very much indeed. Aha. Okay, so in terms of the this presentation. We will post the record, a link to the record on the website, and we'll send you, I mean, again, anyone who's registered for this and provided email address, will send you information. So the presentation will be available to access. Any more questions? No, in that case, I thank you all very much for your participation, and we'll call this, draw this to a close. So goodbye, and as I say, I hope to see some really good proposals from you. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, Edwin. I'm going to drop out now.